A Utah man will spend the rest of his life in prison for abusing a 2-year-old boy to death.
I just want him to rot in hell. I did not know what he was capable of. I didn't know that he would do this to our boy. Make sure nothing like this ever happens again. And I just want every person out there to protect their children and do not trust anybody they don't know.
The sound was soft at first, uneven, shallow breaths echoing in the creak of old wooden floorboards. In the cold stillness of a December morning in Roy, Utah, those breaths almost disappeared into silence. And then, silence won. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the house had gone completely quiet. Just hours earlier, the small home had been alive with laughter. 2-year-old twins, their tiny hands gripping toys, their voices spilling joy into every corner of the modest house. It was the kind of sound that makes a place feel whole. But now, one child lay unresponsive on the porch, his body still. Inside, his twin sister clung to life, barely conscious, her fragile chest rising and falling with effort. The man watching them wasn't some intruder who forced his way in. He wasn't a stranger hiding in the shadows. He was someone the family trusted, someone they welcomed into their home, relied on to protect their children. But in those dark hours between joy and tragedy, something happened. Something so cruel, so devastating, it would not only break one family apart, but reveal the deep cracks in a system that was supposed to protect children everywhere. And the most chilling truth, this wasn't his first time. The man who was trusted with their children had already been convicted for harming a child before, yet he was free, without restrictions, free to walk into homes, free to be near the most vulnerable. Before we continue, if this is your first time here, welcome. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Feel free to share in the comments. And to our amazing community, especially those of you who return week after week to seek justice and raise awareness, you are the reason this channel exists. Every share, every comment, every like is a voice for the voiceless. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you want to help protect children by spreading awareness of their stories, consider subscribing, because sometimes knowing what happened is the first step to stopping it from happening again. Alistair Samuel Kuzler was only 2 years old, but to those who knew him, his presence filled an entire room. He had the kind of energy that pulled people in, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, and always moving. He was born alongside his twin sister, Laura. Together, they were a perfect pair, two halves of the same heart. The Kuzler family lived in Roy, Utah, a small city known for quiet neighborhoods and close-knit communities. For Justin and Brittany Kuzler, who had been high school sweethearts and stayed in the town they grew up in, it was exactly the kind of place they wanted to raise their children. Safe, familiar, surrounded by people they trusted. Alistair was the more outgoing of the twins, curious about everything, fearless in a way that kept his parents on edge, but also filled them with pride. He loved being near his father, curling up beside him to watch episodes of Teen Titans Go with wide eyes, or carrying around his favorite plush toy, Puss in Boots, a treasure he almost never let go of. When he wasn't playing, he was drawing, filling pages with colorful shapes and messy scribbles that he'd proudly show off to anyone who looked his way. Lara, born just minutes after him, was quieter, observant. She often watched Alistair's wild adventures before slowly joining in, the calmer half of the pair. Where he was bold, she was steady. Where he was fearless, she was careful. Together they balanced each other, moving through life side by side, rarely apart. Their older sister Bella was part of that circle too, another piece of their little world. And at the heart of it all was their grandmother, Joanne Kuzler. To the children, Joanne's home was more than just another house. It was a second haven, a place filled with warmth, safety, and the steady love only a grandmother can give. On the surface, everything about their lives seemed safe. Justin and Brittany were careful about who they let around their children. They kept a small, trusted circle when it came to childcare. Friends, close relatives, only people they believed would protect their kids with the same fierce devotion they did. The parents worked hard to create a home built on love, on trust, on the belief that their children were secure. No one imagined that danger could come from inside that very circle. A belief built on trust would soon be shattered. Among the Kuzler family's small circle of trusted friends was Jonathan Allen Dunn. At 36 years old, Jonathan was a familiar face in their lives. To neighbors, he seemed calm, patient, and dependable, the kind of man who always appeared willing to help when needed. Over the years, he had been around the Kuzlers often enough to earn something rare, the kind of trust that allows parents to hand over their children, believing they would be safe. To Brittany and Justin, he wasn't just an acquaintance, he carried himself more like an adopted uncle. Someone reliable, someone they thought would protect their children when life demanded an extra set of hands. But behind that carefully maintained image was a past almost no one knew about. In 2017, Jonathan had been convicted of intentional child endangerment after a horrifying incident. Court records showed he had severely injured a 2-year-old child in his care, leaving the toddler with a broken arm and visible bruises across the face. The injuries told a story that no words could soften, a grown man inflicting harm on a defenseless child. For that crime, Jonathan served time in prison. He was released in April of 2019 and remained on parole until December of 2021. But here lies the failure. Once Jonathan's parole ended, the system let go of him completely. No restrictions, no oversight, no warnings to the public. His name never appeared on a database that would have set off alarms for parents. To the outside world, he was just another man living freely in the community. The violent history against a child was buried in the shadows of court documents, invisible to families who might have welcomed him into their homes. And this gap, this silence between his release and the absence of any monitoring, became a dangerous space where children were once again left vulnerable. For the Kuzlers, Jonathan's willingness to step in during last-minute emergencies looked like kindness. There was no reason to question it. How could they imagine that a man who had once been convicted for harming a child was now in their living room, once again trusted to care for little ones? As December of 2023 approached, the Kuzler family was busy with the rhythm of the holiday season. Work schedules, errands, Christmas preparations, the usual chaos of a young family. With 3 children, including energetic twins, occasional babysitting wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. And Jonathan had filled that role before. On earlier occasions, he had watched the twins without any signs of trouble, at least none that Brittany or Justin ever saw. To them, it felt safe, familiar, routine. The system's silence made it even easier to trust him. There were no alerts, no notifications, nothing to suggest that this man was dangerous. His past, filled with violence against a child, was hidden in plain sight. On the evening of December 20th, 2023, the Kuzlers once again turned to Jonathan. They needed someone to stay with the twins through the evening and into the next morning. Jonathan agreed. He had done it before. The arrangement seemed ordinary. He would handle bedtime, keep the children safe overnight, and be there when their parents returned. From the outside, it was nothing unusual. Just a winter night in Utah, a trusted acquaintance babysitting 2 toddlers in a warm, quiet home. But inside that house, something far more sinister was taking shape. According to Jonathan's own statements later given to police, the night began harmlessly. He said they played simple games, laughed, and passed the evening without incident. But investigators would later discover that his version of events was far from the truth. Evidence told a much darker story. Police say the play escalated into behavior that was not only unsafe, but deadly dangerous for children so young. What began as laughter and games would soon turn into chaos and violence. Within hours, one child would be unresponsive and another would be clinging to life. The Kuzlers, like most parents, believed they had left their children in safe hands. Instead, they had unknowingly left them with a man whose past crimes had been hidden from them, a man who was about to change their lives forever. Investigators would later piece together what happened inside the Kuzler home that December night, and what they found was beyond disturbing. Both twins showed injuries that were not consistent with simple accidents or playful roughhousing. Their small bodies told the truth. Laura's most obvious wound was a head injury, trauma that doctors believed came from impact with a hard surface inside the home. Alistair showed similar signs of blunt force harm. These were injuries that required force no toddler should ever endure. At some point during the night, Jonathan gave both children a mix of medications, children's Tylenol, cough syrup, and even a sleep aid. None of these had been authorized by their parents. There was no medical reason for these drugs to be given. To detectives, the conclusion was chillingly clear. Jonathan wanted the children sedated, drowsy, and less likely to resist. But the investigation revealed something even darker. Forensic evidence and medical examinations uncovered signs of contact in areas that no one could explain as part of normal caregiving. Both twins had injuries that suggested deliberate harm in ways no child should ever face. During questioning, Jonathan admitted that he had used items from inside the home, including a foam mallet and even a toy, in ways that were, as investigators carefully phrased it, inappropriate and harmful. These objects were not playthings that night. They were tools of pain and control. His actions went far beyond neglect. They were deliberate choices to hurt, choices that left scars no child should carry. By the next morning, December 21st, sometime between 8:30 and 9 a.m., little Alistair's breathing stopped. His small body could no longer fight. Jonathan later admitted he recognized the boy was in distress, but he did not act. Nearly an hour passed before he finally called 911, an hour that could have meant the difference between life and death. When first responders arrived, the scene was heartbreaking. Alistair was found unresponsive on the porch. Inside, Lara was conscious but injured, clinging to life. Even more shocking, investigators discovered that several other unrelated children were also present inside the home. They were removed immediately and placed in protective custody. The chain of events, the aggressive handling, the unauthorized medications, the inappropriate contact, and the long unexplained delay in calling for help formed the backbone of the criminal case against Jonathan. Each detail exposed another layer of cruelty, another failure to protect. It wasn't a single act of violence. It was a night of escalating harm that ended in tragedy. By late morning, the 911 call had been logged, and emergency teams rushed in. Within minutes, units from the Roy City Police Department and paramedics flooded the scene. The urgency in their movements showed they knew exactly how critical the situation was. Paramedics reached Alistair first. They tried everything, but his tiny body had already endured too much. Nothing could bring him back. He was pronounced dead shortly after their arrival. Attention then turned to Lara. She was still alive, but her injuries were severe. Paramedics stabilized her and rushed her to a specialized children's hospital. A scan confirmed what they already feared. Lara had suffered a brain bleed. Doctors began immediate treatment. For hours, her life hung in the balance, but slowly, with medical intervention, her condition stabilized. Meanwhile, officers began a careful, methodical walkthrough of the house. What they saw didn't match Jonathan's story. He had described a quiet night of games and routine care, but the scene told a different truth. The state of the rooms, the placement of objects, and the items scattered throughout the home pointed toward violence. Detectives quickly realized this was not a house where children had simply been playing. It was a crime scene. The early observations were supported by the hospital's medical reports. The severity of the children's injuries, the presence of medications in their systems, and the inconsistencies in Jonathan's account gave investigators immediate cause to escalate the case. This was no accident. This was abuse, deliberate and sustained. From that moment on, the mission for law enforcement was twofold: protect the surviving child and secure every piece of evidence that could explain what had really happened inside that house. The Roy City Police Department took the lead. Officers secured the scene, blocking off the home as crime scene tape was stretched across the yard. Forensic specialists moved carefully from room to room, documenting everything. Every item, every stain, every object out of place was collected. Many of these details would later prove critical in court. It was the beginning of a long and painful investigation, one that would not only uncover the brutal truth about Jonathan, but also raise a haunting question. How was a man with a history of child abuse able to walk so freely among children again? Among the evidence collected that night was a foam mallet, a Nerf toy that should have been harmless, designed for play and laughter. But investigators determined it had been used for something far darker, far from its intended purpose. Alongside it were bottles of over-the-counter medicines, the same ones Jonathan had admitted giving the twins without their parents' knowledge or consent. As detectives pieced together the timeline, Jonathan was brought in for questioning. At first, he tried to frame his actions as innocent. He admitted that he had gotten too rough while playing with the twins, conceding that maybe his actions had gone too far. But too rough didn't explain the injuries, the medications, or the delay that had cost Alistair his life. Pressed harder, Jonathan confirmed that he had given the children Tylenol, cough medicine, and a sleep aid, drugs that had never been prescribed or approved. The more he spoke, the less believable his story became. And when investigators asked why he had waited so long to call for help after realizing Alistair was struggling to breathe, Jonathan's answers shifted again and again, his words tangled in contradictions, raising even more suspicion. A background check revealed a truth that stunned not only the investigators, but also the Kuzler family and their community. He wasn't just a man who had made a terrible mistake that night, he was a man with a violent past. In 2017, he had already been convicted for harming a young child. Most people who knew him had no idea about this history. To them, he was just Uncle Jonathan, a friendly face, a trusted figure. The revelation was a gut punch. It forced everyone to ask the same question: how had this man been trusted again? The forensic reports, combined with Jonathan's own admissions, left little doubt. This had been a night of escalating harm. A night where choices were made without the slightest care for the well-being of two innocent children. And the most haunting part was not only what happened, but how easily it could have been prevented. In December 2023, after weeks of investigation, the Weber County Attorney's Office filed charges against Jonathan. The list was long and severe. The most serious was aggravated murder, a capital offense in Utah, one that could carry the death penalty. Alongside it came charges of aggravated child abuse and 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse of a child. Prosecutors said the charges reflected the sustained and deliberate nature of Jonathan's actions. This was not an accident. This was cruelty, calculated and intentional. As the case moved forward, the possibility of a capital trial remained on the table. But on August 13, 2024, Jonathan chose to plead guilty to all charges. In exchange, prosecutors removed the death penalty from consideration. The decision ensured something final. Jonathan would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no chance of parole. He would never be free again. At sentencing, Judge Noel S. Hyde presided over the proceedings. For aggravated murder, Jonathan received life without parole. For each count of aggravated sexual abuse, he was sentenced to 15 years to life. The aggravated child abuse conviction carried a term of 1 to 15 years. All sentences would run concurrently. In the eyes of the court, Jonathan would never walk free. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident, prosecutors said. This was intentional depravity. When Jonathan was given the chance to speak, he offered a statement that felt hollow in the face of what he had done. "I just want to say I'm sorry for what I've done, and it haunts me every day. I hope one day the family can forgive me." But forgiveness was not something the Kuzlers could give. Jonathan's words fell on hearts that had been broken beyond repair. The family's response was clear and direct. "Jonathan, you are the epitome of evil. Our family will never forgive you for the damage you have done and the evil acts you committed against these sweet, innocent babies." Inside the courtroom, prosecutors from the Weber County Attorney's Office laid out the case in stark detail. They described the scene inside the Kuzler home, the medical reports, and Jonathan's own admissions. They reminded the court that this was not about an accident or a single bad decision. This was about intentional and calculated actions against the very children he had been trusted to protect. For the community of Roy, Utah, the case was more than just the story of one family's tragedy. It became a warning, a painful reminder of the gaps in a system that had allowed a convicted abuser to walk freely among children again. The guilty plea meant there would be no long trial, no endless days of testimony, and no waiting for a verdict. It brought legal closure, but it did not bring peace. Jonathan was sentenced to life in prison, a punishment that ensured he would never walk free again. Yet, for the Kuzler family, the sentence was not the end. It was only another chapter in their grief. Justin and Brittany, Alistair's parents, never missed a hearing. They sat in court, surrounded by relatives, their quiet presence speaking louder than any words could. Every time they walked into that courtroom, it was a reminder of what had been taken from them, a young boy full of light, love, and laughter. After the tragedy, friends of the family created a verified fundraiser to help with funeral expenses. The response was overwhelming. Messages of love and support poured in from neighbors, strangers, even people in other states. Many expressed outrage, many shared heartbreak, but all stood with the family in their darkest time. During sentencing, the Kuzlers spoke directly to the court. Their voices carried the weight of pain, but also strength. They did not only talk about their grief, they demanded change. They called for stronger protections for children, accountability for those who had failed them, and a system that would not allow another dangerous offender to slip through the cracks. The case sparked conversations far beyond that courtroom. Advocacy groups, local leaders, and parents across Utah began questioning how caregivers are vetted, how background checks are handled, and why dangerous gaps exist in the system. People wanted answers, and more importantly, they wanted solutions. Jonathan's past was not hidden. His conviction for harming a child was part of the public record. But once his parole ended in December 2021, the system stopped watching. No one tracked his behavior. No one warned families. He blended back into the community, able to take on positions of trust around children with no barriers in his way. In Utah, as in many states, background checks are only mandatory for licensed daycares or official childcare facilities. But when it comes to neighbors, friends, or unofficial babysitters, there are no real requirements. Families are left to rely on trust, without knowing if that trust is safe. In Alistair's case, that lack of oversight proved devastating. The tragedy is a reminder that parents must take extra steps to protect their children. Independent background checks can be run on any caregiver, even if they are close family friends. Stopping by unexpectedly during childcare hours can help keep things transparent. Most importantly, children must be given the tools to speak up. Age-appropriate conversations about boundaries and body safety can give them the language to say when something feels wrong. Parents are also urged to listen to their instincts. A sudden change in a child's behavior, injuries that have no clear explanation, or secrecy from a caregiver, these are all signs that should never be ignored. And if harm is ever suspected, reporting immediately to Child Protection Services or law enforcement can mean the difference between safety and further tragedy. Alistair's case is a painful warning of what happens when vigilance slips. The justice system must do more, but communities and families also play a role in protecting children every day. Today, Alistair's memory lives on. His family remembers his joy, his energy, the way he made every room brighter. His twin sister Laura continues her recovery, surrounded by love and support. Friends, neighbors, and advocates now rally in his name, pushing for reforms so that no other family will face the same loss. This is more than a story. It is a lesson, a warning, and a call to action. If this case opened your eyes, please share it so others can recognize the warning signs. And if you want to help protect children by spreading awareness of their stories, consider subscribing, because sometimes knowing what happened is the first step to stopping it from happening again.